Good afternoon. The time is now 1:17, and a quorum of the board is present. The State Board of Ed meeting of February 12th is called to order of the regular meeting. And we're going to adjust the timing a little bit to accommodate our guests. The first guests would be new members of the team here at the department. And we started this a while back, and these are mostly filling vacancies. But I'm going to turn it over to Carol, Susan, and Sally to make those introductions of our new team members.
Okay, I will go first. Matt Ayotte is new to the Bureau of Assessment and Accountability. Matt, you want to say a little about what you do?
Well, I am online assessment specialist, so I'm helping the department with the implementation of all these, basically rolling over to the online realm of testing, focusing a lot on the technical aspects of how we use it.
Welcome.
We're glad to have you. And Christine is help. I'm happy to introduce Hannah Brookhart, who is joining us from the Library of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. Over at the Library of Michigan, I work in tech services, and my primary responsibilities are scanning legal documents. And so we're putting them online so that patrons can use the legal days so they're going to be available.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Laurie Nixon. Laurie, would you explain a little bit about what you're doing? Certainly. I coordinate the Michigan Collaborative Early Childhood Conference, which the Department of Education has sponsored for many years. And I've been doing that since 1996 as a contractor for the department. I think the longest contractor in history. And I'm delighted to now be a part-time employee. Thank you.
Welcome. Well, thank you, and you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. And I think...
Yeah, they have work to do.
Boy.
Busy.
Yeah, there's exciting work here.
They're busy.
Why am I ready to hit the gavel? I don't know. I think we're going to go right to Mertz and go to public participation.
I have 3 forms here for public participation. If I have not collected your form, I would be happy to have that. The first person up to speak is Mary Wood, and she will be followed by Harrison Blackman. Mary, if you'd come to the table, please. And as she's coming to the table, I'll remind all the speakers that you would have 5 minutes to speak, and the board does not, for the most part, have a discussion back and forth with you at the board table at this time.
I got them stacked every other which way. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary T. Wood. I live at 27533 Santa Ana in Warren, Michigan. And it's been a while since I've been here, and I'd like to say hello to the newest members of the State Board. Since you may not be aware of my previous attendance here at the meeting, you'll get to know me pretty fast by reading the first draft that I've given you. I won't go through that, but this is an email cover letter that I addressed to myself. I addressed myself to the members of the EAA Board of Directors to identify who I am and what my work is about. So I think if you give that a glance over, you'll get a good overview of who I am. I'm here today, though, to talk about the EAA. And coming to find out that they have now become one of our newest state authorizers, I started delving into finding out what they're all about as an authorizer. You can't know them without researching. So here is my EAA binder. And unfortunately, I am a very strong advocate for saving the environment, but when it comes to the internet, I've learned if you see something on it, you better print it out, because next time you go back, it may not be there. So I copy everything, and I have this as my resource traveling filing cabinet. These are just the minutes from the EAA meetings. Not only are they in paper printout, which has a very thorough narrative, but they also include a archived video of the meetings that were live streamed, which I've gone back and I've viewed them all and reviewed them and compared them to what's written in, just in case I missed something. So what brought me to my email to the Board of Directors was my attendance at the Charter School Board meeting in January, the charter school that they authorized. And they were having a special EAA meeting the next morning, which they announced to the public that they had a shortage in funds and was going to ask for an advancement on their state aid for February. Well, having heard that, I couldn't resist but to write and to share. This is what I'm about. I always look at the Board of Directors. The finger pointing always goes to the Board of Directors when it comes to the accountability of any school district. And based on the research that I've done already, I couldn't resist. So my shoe-in was I'm a charter school advocate, but while I got your attention, let me tell you a few other things too that I've come to know about you. And maybe it's just the fact that you don't know what you don't know, so let me shed some light on some things that I think you need to know. So that's what I've included in here on my second stapled packet together. Cover letter on the top, and the document basically can stand alone in this format. It goes through areas of concerns that I have, and number one is that I feel like the public board, if they're not operating, walking their talk, this is when public trust starts to break down. First off, we came to know that there was going to be an 11-member board. In reality, there's only a 5-member voting board. The other additional members are basically they are in an advisory capacity. And that means you can have 3 to have a meeting, and you can actually pass something with 2 votes. That's a little bit concerning for me when we're talking about such an important entity as the statewide school district with our most priority schools. I know I'm not going to have enough time to go through here, but I want to hit on a couple things. One of the items was the appointment of the chancellor. I testified this at the hearings on the legislation last December, is that my concern was in the appointment of the chancellor, they totally violated their own transparency and integrity of that whole process. It was stated at the first meeting that the appointment of the chancellor should happen very quickly in order to get things moving in place. And board members, EAA board members were asking the right questions. But they were told that it would take maybe about 45 days to be able to have a person in place, and that this process should happen as soon as possible. And that Chairperson Roy Roberts had said, what we're going to do is I'm going to send forward to you a procedure. We will need to review this, approve it. We can do this at a telephonic meeting, and we will post this online so all our citizens are aware of what this process will look like. 2 weeks later, they called a special meeting. The chancellor position was being held open at that time. There was an interview process for one candidate, and he was chosen that day. Nobody saw it coming. So I have right away, my public trust is being violated here as far as that process did not happen as they said it would. My other big point here I want to bring to your attention, though, is that that meeting that happened in January was the announcement that they needed to ask for an advancement on their state aid. The newspaper articles left off a critical piece of information. There was an $18 million shortfall in their budget that members of the EAA, Dr. Covington, as well as Roy Roberts, knew about this the second week before school started in August and failed to share this with the rest of the board. And now came January, since they didn't get Race to the Funds money that they were hoping to get in December, which was anywhere up to $30 million, they couldn't offset that loss. So now they're coming forward with a shortage of funds, and from here on out, it appears they're going to have a shortage of funds. So I've addressed this issue here in my letter, among other things, but I just wanted to put that out there publicly, that who's minding the store here when we got 11 members sitting on this team, and the director of this team is withholding information from the rest of its members? That's of great concern to me as a public citizen and as a taxpayer.
Thank you, Ms. Wood.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Our next speaker is Harrison Blackman, and following Harrison Blackman will be Dan Quisenberry.
Good afternoon. I'm Harrison Blackman. I'm State Director for Democrats for Education Reform, a small group of us. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you, my first time appearing before the board. Thank God there's some familiar faces around the table. First of all, I want to congratulate you on this, the board and the department, on a very comprehensive and thorough report on authorizer comparison review. We've needed this for a long, long time. I think the most important thing that public officials can do is to create transparency so that the citizens of the state will know exactly what's going on in the activities that are sponsored and run by government. And from my perspective, there's no more important responsibility, no more important activity than the education of our children. So you serve a very critical role, and I applaud you for taking this on. It's a tough job. I think the report does a good job of highlighting areas where authorizers need to pay attention to what is happening in their schools. They need to pay attention to who they're authorizing and how well those schools are performing. The next step, which is what I hope we will talk about, is something that Mr. Varner raised and others of you have talked about, and that is the issue of quality. I was around when charter schools were first talked about and legislation was approved, and the idea was that charter schools wouldn't be just a carbon copy of the traditional schools, that if we wanted to create new schools, they would be better schools than the ones that we currently have. Well, that's the promise of charter schools. I'm not sure that if you look at this report, that promise has been realized. We still have an opportunity to realize that promise. The key to that are the authorizers and how well they do their job of first vetting the people who come before them who want to start charter schools, and secondly, providing oversight to those schools that are already authorized. I'm not sure how they do that. There is absolutely no transparency as it relates to how authorizers do their job in selecting management or in supporting and encouraging management. I'm not one who favors closing schools lightly. The impact on the children, the staffs, and the parents is pretty grim when that happens. So the idea is to try to avoid that at all costs. And the one way we can do that is to make sure up front that we do the best job possible of authorizing schools. Under the previous law, there was sort of a system that was already in place to limit it. If you had one or two charters and you had 6 or 7 applicants coming before you, you could pick the best one, and you had a pretty good chance of getting a good one. Under the new law, where the cap is off, then we may not have that check that we've had under the previous law. So that's something we need to think about. Last, I think we need to look at the management companies themselves. This is the authorizers. The key, the people who provide the education, are the management companies. And I would like to see how well the management companies are performing in this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dan Quisenberry.
Green light came on. I'll get this closer. Can you hear me okay? I'm Dan Quisenberry. I'm the president of the Michigan Association of Public School Academies. We're the membership organization for the 277 charter schools in the state of Michigan, but we work with authorizers and management organizations and really anybody that has anything to do with the charter public schools in the state of Michigan. I wanted to speak briefly in just response to some things in the report. I appreciate the discussion. We embrace accountability. We embrace transparency as it drives towards excellence in education. Sometimes even those discussions can become obstacles, so we're always trying to make sure we're really keeping the focus on better achievement for kids. So a few factual things I noticed in the conversation. Public school academies are LEAs, they're districts. An authorizer's role is not as a district. It's really a reflection of the department's role. In fact, that's their job, is to make sure that things that the department would do for any school district in the state are actually being done by a charter school. So they're very often hesitant to play a district's role in driving things or deciding things. Theirs is to monitor compliance, particularly even with academic performance, and make sure that things are there. So again, understanding the relationship to those schools. Each charter school has its own board of public officials. Special education was talked about. We're proud of the fact that there are relatively narrow margins between kids in both charters or traditionals. The Department of Education, this department's own reporting has shown that there's a 2% gap. It changes year to year. There's actually a very similar distribution of the same types of severity of kids with special education. So we have all phases in charters and traditional schools. We also see that 5% of kids in the state of Michigan are in center-based programs. They're not likely to make decisions to choose a charter just to be reassigned back to a center-based program. So there's always going to be some differences, and those are things we're really trying to, we work very hard at making sure that all kids are served well, treated similarly, and that the parents are getting what they're looking for when they're making choices. You saw in the numbers that I thought the department did a nice job of identifying charters. There are differences in poverty and the way the kids are made up. Those aren't excuses, but we do try to recognize things that may impact results so we understand what those results are telling us. I think you got a good indication of some of that. But I also want to point out that chartering is becoming a strategy. And what I mean by that is when the initial law was placed, the strategy was opening new schools and responding to that and creating quality choices. More and more it's beginning to be used as a response to failure. So Detroit Public has turned over buildings outside of the EAA to chartering. Authorizers ahead of that have used chartering as a strategy, whether it's through strict discipline academies, ISDs, through setting up schools that are used to respond to AYP issues, etc. My question is, how are you going to hold them accountable? Will it be the same? Will it be different? Will authorizers be penalized or discouraged from trying to do what those strategies might suggest they ought to be doing when it may almost start with some challenges by design? Also, I heard a lot of discussion about regulation. Please, I'd love to spend more time and help everyone understand that charter schools, all public schools, are regulated thoroughly. I'm not always convinced that more regulation will drive us to quality, or we might see the kind of performance all of us are looking for in all of our schools. I also would suggest, and I will suggest this to authorizers, that I think it was even mentioned as you were closing up, a much better understanding of what authorizers currently do in their practices would be a good exercise. Hard to suggest diagnoses without understanding what the patient's really dealing with. So having a sense of their processes and their current strategies, the kind of sophisticated data analysis that they take in so you can hold them accountable might be a worthy endeavor. We have learned some things in charter schools. There's reports around nationally, like the Hamilton Project. I heard people asking questions, what are we really learning there? Well, charter schools focus on the human capital. They drive being driven by using student data to drive their performance. They spend more time on tutoring and extended time on tasks. These are things you're starting to see as best practices that we do want to encourage and we don't want to discourage. And that good authorizing is part of that. And actually, Michigan is held up as a model of that. So sometimes we have to be careful about using national studies to make generalizations about Michigan, when most people around the country are looking at Michigan authorizers as doing the kind of job most states should do. They're very professional about what they're trying to do, and it's a new kind of thing that they're doing. So the last comment I would make, and I know I've run out of time, is I really would encourage you. I also heard people saying around this table, this is about accountability. Governance is less relevant. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and yet we spent the time talking about 7% of the kids that are in charter public schools. My suggestion would be you can produce reports that would look at 100% of the students. A comparable role in the traditional side of the equation would be the intermediate school districts. Not perfect, but similar. Where are they being held accountable? Let's ask Oakland ISD, how is Pontiac performing? Let's ask Kent County, how is Grand Rapids or particular buildings being held accountable? If you were doing some things across the board, I think the human nature of the charter school sector feeling picked on would be minimized, and you might actually call attention to other performance that needs to be addressed in the state as well. But thank you for the chance to talk. We don't mind the attention. We're happy to have good, informed discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Well, great. That leads us right into returning to that discussion as much as the board sees fit. John suggested at that time that we move to closed session, and are there other thoughts or comments for today?
When we left off, Kathy, you had some additional points on the charter school report, but while people are conjuring what they do want to say, I'm looking for any good next steps that we might want to encourage coming out of this discussion and this report. I think for me, one may be let's continue to build into our accountability system the kind of reporting by authorizer alongside how we report on regular schools. With all due respect to Dan, I appreciate his comments, but I do think given what we've seen with charter schools and what we may see if we have authorization of new specialty schools, online schools, anything else, the authorizer is the public body that is, we do want to call to account for the performance of the schools and education delivery agents that they authorize. We've seen in this state a whole range of ways charters are created and governed, including more management company operated schools, and in many cases, as we know, the board assembled is an agent of the management company. And so that's why I'm looking for the public body, and I'm not doing anything different than what Mark Murray, when he was the Governor English Treasurer and was President of Grand Valley, said, hold the authorizers accountable, and it will go a long way to get the kind of charter regime that we need.
I would like to say something now. To hold the authorizers accountable, we really have to do that because the public really doesn't know who those bodies are. I mean, they're public bodies, but I bet 1 out of 100 doesn't know who was on the board of Central Michigan or Eastern Michigan or any of those, Wayne State for that matter. You're the one. No, but they're public bodies, but they're not well known. I mean, we're not well known, so they're really not that well known. So
you get 2 million votes. Just keep it there.
We have a job to do. But Harrison brought up something that we've been fighting for 10, 12 years already, and that is holding the getting information out of the management companies. We've been trying to get them to give more information for years, And it's been a struggle. We really don't get the data from them that we should because they claim they're private companies. But they're doing the public's work, the public's business. And I think we ought to reactivate that effort to hold the management companies accountable.
May I, before Dan and...
That's one of our number one priorities. I mean, once for a long time, I think we should be doing it again.
Yeah, before Dan, and then if I might just suggest, sometimes when we come up with these, we try to get them and catch them in debrief when we meet as a team.
Yeah.
But this might be an example of an example where looking at management companies' transparency becomes a thought for the legislative committee to pick up and possibly propose legislation. Because I think we can be, and then debate it there. You know, there may be pros and cons to this, and then bringing it back to the board. But at least when we have some of these ideas, we're trying to get better at where do we put that then to maybe get some action on it, as Kathy's indicating. And I think Harrison did a good job in describing the importance, and as did Mary, the importance of transparency, as did Dan, frankly. So that would be an example, but it might be something we'd want on that agenda for process purposes, I mean. You know, does it infer legislation? Does it... Just a thought. I think it was Dan and then Michelle.
Just a couple of things, I think. One is, so I, too, like John, would agree that it's a completely appropriate and not only appropriate but necessary for us to shine a light on authorizer performance. Respect the opinion of Dan Quisenberry on that issue, but I think authorizers have a critically important role to play here, particularly as the entity that is charged with opening and closing, actually granting charters for and then closing schools that are not performing well or taking the charter away, as the case may be. That having been said, I think his point about ISDs is a good one, and we do spend a lot of money on intermediates. I mean, they are a vehicle through which we expect to improve and support school performance, and it's well worth our time to make sure that that vehicle is performing well as well. So I'd actually suggest that we put on a future agenda a discussion about intermediate school districts and their performance. Third quick point, and that is that increasingly there are charter schools that actually are something of specialty schools. There are a number of nonprofit organizations in Detroit that serve a particular clientele, say homeless young people, who have opened charter schools specifically to serve that clientele of young people. And so I don't want it to go unresponded to. Don't want to let go unresponded to the notion that that I don't care about all kids, or that this board doesn't. I am sure that everyone does. My perspective on that is that we can get to schools that perform well for all kids through appropriate regulation of a marketplace that still allows for parents to choose from among different options of schools. And I completely respect the opinion of those who disagree, although I will forcefully argue my opinion every chance I get. Lastly, I just want to thank this group for the conversation that we had this morning and have started and hopefully will continue to have. And I want to thank this group early, but nonetheless, thank you ahead of time for your bias towards action on this issue. I think that it is absolutely necessary that this table stand for kids in this debate, and that requires that we actually have a bias toward a policy, toward regulation that would allow the higher quality authorizers, however we define them, there's work to be done in that regard, to expand, and lower quality folks not to. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Michelle and then Richard.
Okay. I had some questions. So the private, Mr. Harrison?
Harrison Blackman.
Harrison Blackman, sorry. So we cannot access information from these private management groups. Do they report to the public sector authorizers? Do they provide any? So why can't we FOIA or access by holding the authorizers accountable, right? Why can't we access the information from them if they're collecting the reports? Or are they, my fear is that they may be collecting at 3% of the the money on each kid, but maybe not doing a whole lot of oversight. I'm not quite sure what the role is of the authorizers. What do they do for that 3%? Do they do any oversight? Should we not hold them accountable? And if they are doing the oversight and do have access to that, why can't we access the information directly from them?
Just, if I may, a quick
Yeah.
response to your question would be, the reason I was hoping to, at least one place to put it was legislative committee, to give us some
Right.
time to investigate.
Okay.
I mean, the spirit that Kathy brought up and you're reemphasizing, we do remember and lost some ground on that, but feel that it should be as transparent as it would be in a local district. I think, if I remember, one of the impediments is we'd have to be clear that the board, the LEA that Dan talked about, selects the management company. Admittedly, one would think that if an authorizer thinks it's not a good management company, they would influence that board or maybe take away their charter. So, I mean, there is an interrelationship to all this. Does that seem to be happening across the board? I think it would be fair to say not across the board. But the basic thing of transparency is why I think there's merit to at least discussing that, and wondered if that's an appropriate place to put it, because first of all, I don't have all the answers today, but we can try to.
But I think to your question, and correct me if I'm wrong, a big difference and a big challenge has been a traditional public school. The dollars they spend, almost every dollar is transparent, although if they contract with, say, for computer services with some company, there's nothing that allows necessarily us to go visit the books of that company except for what they're required as a company to publicly report. The same is true for a charter school, but in this case, the whole operation could be with a private company. So we don't necessarily, the public doesn't necessarily have as much insight. They don't open up their books for us beyond what they're required to as a public company to see how are you spending this money and how much money are you making, et cetera, et cetera.
And they don't have, I'm sorry, in some cases, what happens is the board, the selected board, will basically sign a contract with the management company, giving them full authority essentially over the budget, the hiring, the firing, everything. Because then they are now a private company, they do not have to report the same things that, say, your local school would. How much they're paying, well, I think they do have to report how much they're paying the teachers, just not the way that the local
CEO
school
or
board. What their profit is, all of these types of things. All of a sudden, even though they have a transparency code on their website, a lot of what ends up being put on that transparency code is, we don't report this, essentially. So there's not, there are differences in what they do and do not need to report, and as a result, it's really difficult to make comparisons of, who's doing what and how they're doing it.
Right, and that's good. But then my question is, why are they getting 3% if they're abdicating everything?
Well, they're not. They do provide.
What do they do?
They have compliance officers. They have field workers. My wife's deputy director at CMU's Charter School Center, and so there's a lot of administrative support. In particular, the contract, which is the primary means by which authorizers hold the charter boards responsible for their academic goals and meeting state compliance requirements.
So, and your wife who works for CMU, who's a public entity, has access to information, and has that at CMU, so why can't we access those reports that she has? It seems to me that's what I'm saying.
Sure.
So,
I think
that was my question.
No, please go to. I just wanted to make sure we're going to follow on that, which I think John captured very well and reminded me of the thing we'd have to work through in some place, whether it's a legislative committee or whatever, is how we would deal with that consistency that theoretically you could, as a traditional district, contract out half your operation. You could have your, and then how do we distinguish between, once it's a company you've done a contract with, what they have to disclose. But I think the spirit of what I'm hearing the board asking us to look through is to at least look at is there a vehicle to try to get more of that?
Right. Can I just these are quicker. I'm sorry. One is, if there's a report on charter schools that provides some information about the number and degree of children with severe disabilities and other, I would love to see any sort of report on that. But what I've understood is that that's very difficult to access that type of information because
Dan, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you inferred you had access to something like that?
One of the department produced reports for the state board several years ago.
Several years ago.
And it dug into the different variations of the...
Okay.
We'll follow up with that and see if we can replicate that. I
One
don't...
more recent report.
Okay.
Okay.
So we...
And then the
you
last
got that
thing I
right.
wanted to just, I wanted to just recognize something that Ms. Wood said, and I think is very important, and I think it speaks to the importance of governance, and is that if you have a governance structure where there's only 3 people can make decisions, and it does affect, I think, the quality of those decisions. I think it affects the, the engagement in the community. I think it affects the ability of teachers to come forward or people to come forward with information that would be helpful and valuable. If, for instance, they don't have any job security. I think all of this is very important, and I think it all has an impact on the quality of education. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that forward, your report.
Thank you, Michelle. Richard.
I just wanted to reflect a little bit. What we're really talking about here is structures that administer public education. And many of us have been involved with one structure so long that we identify it exclusively with public education. Charter schools have become, as Dan Quisenberry has pointed out, a strategy by which some public school districts now are attempting to address problems. Mr. Blackman pointed out that the promise of charter schools has not been fully realized, and I hardly concur. I would like to see a great deal more variety, curricular offerings, and educational approaches. And this is where I would, I guess, disagree with Brother Varner's assessment. I think the charter schools are so regulated that it has kept many of the desirable fruits of choice in education from being able to blossom and grow. But my point is not to advocate one system or another, but simply to make us aware that we're talking about, because we've got now with the McClellan recommendations and wherever those go, we're talking about restructuring how public education is administered, hopefully in a more equitable way, in a more effective way. And I think that's the bottom line. We want to look for the structuring that will best deliver education to our children in the 21st century. And I hope we'll all be, and I've been very pleased with my colleagues here as to their open-mindedness and candid discussion on many of these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just make some
Yes.
suggestions to the
Sure.
next action steps? So I think it would be important, now that we've done this report, that obviously the authorizers get a copy of it, but I'm wondering if there's anyone else we should send it to, such as the legislature, the governor's office. Well, yeah, Mr. not here, so that might be interested in seeing the report as well. I'm sure there are some on the west side who'd like to congratulate the university over there, and there might be some up in the Upper Peninsula that like to ask a few questions of some of theirs up there. So I think it would be important to do that.
I agree.
We can do that. Yeah, Eileen, please.
I agree also, but I'd like to reflect, I'd like to have the forwarding of the report reflect some of the discussions we had about the fact that this is using MEEP data. And just as Dan Quisenberry said, this is a report that we could draw for any district in the state. If we're really interested in improving education for every child, and not just trying to regulate charters more, since we don't have an accreditation system that works, I think we really have to be thoughtful about whether we apply this just to charters or whether we take a look at all the schools and say, can we get more information to them that's useful? So I listen to Dan, my heart is with you, but I also know that we're not doing the job by traditional public schools that we want to have charters do. They can't carry the weight of the whole state. They have a very small percentage of our children. So we should be looking at something that, if we have the data to do it, would work for every child.
If I may, just to Dan's follow-up to the other brother Dan's comment, that ISDs, even though they're not the same, might be an organizing way to do that, if you'd like. That might be an organizing, and I don't want to commit, get shot later, how quickly one could do that, but I think that it's an organizing principle and might shed some light. And I'm thinking, having been an ISD superintendent for 7 years, it probably would have been helpful for me to see that in a different context, to know the services we should be offering and how they might be skewed based on what those results were. I would guess some of them are doing that on their own, and we might, in fact, maybe at our next Darkening the Dotted Line meeting, we can talk that through with them a little bit. But that might be an example to get at Eileen's point, and Dan supported it. John?
I guess, and we had, and I'm happy if we're still continuing it without as much visible priority. The Darkening the Dotted Lines was a very, and hopefully it continues to be an effort to try to align ISD energy and resources on important priorities, right?
Yeah.
It's an extension of what we think are important priorities, and I'm all for that kind of push for alignment. I do note LEAs, local schools, are not creatures of ISDs. They get created by them as charter schools and other specialty and other schools are creatures of the authorizer.
Yeah.
And that to me is important to try to array as we who's responsible for these creatures and their performance. And I agree, we should be looking absolutely comparably at traditional schools, charters, and any other schools in terms of how we're trying to value their progress and their achievement. But the second point that I think, Dan, you made earlier in terms of things we might do in addition to transparent accountability, look for and create opportunities to frame the quality control in new school creation agenda. Because I agree with Dan and many of you, I think we do not need to create new schools that are very likely or demonstrably going to be poor performing. We need to have them be, as Harrison said, effective or more effective than schools we have. We just can't afford to spawn more new schools that we know are going to be bad apples for not educating kids. And we should have some expectations that that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Well, good for now. Good discussion. Excellent. Did you have something, Kath?
I had a
Yes.
question. I want to piggyback on what Mrs. Wood came up. I brought a copy of yesterday's Free Press. The front page had a big story about the career centers in the Detroit Public Schools. And one of the points in it was that the EAA has banned its students from attending the career tech centers. Huh. And I wondered if that's legal. Can they do whatever they want? It seems to me that that's very short-sighted on their part, and it's hurting the career tech centers. It took 15 schools out of their pool. So that seems. I wondered what we could do about that in our role as leadership and general supervision.
We could encourage those opportunities to be made, but traditional districts do that also. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't.
Well, I know all districts don't send kids to those career centers, but we've been trying to elevate the use of the career tech programs as a way of teaching our requirements, and this is sort of counter to what we're trying to do, I think.
Can I just say, from my personal vantage point, and I appreciate Cassandra, whatever, flagging that for me, because it is both wrong and hypocritical, meaning I support the EA. I want it to work, to turn around underperforming schools, period. But we do have enough problem with existing school districts holding hostage kids from going to the Career Technical Center if it's the best place for them, or going to dual enroll because they want to lose the money. And it's also, so we need to do better than that, and certainly expect better than that from the EAA, but also it's totally antithetical to what we've heard the governor propose in terms of let's open up the new right choices for students, whatever they may be, whether it's career technical or an online. This flies in the face of that. No, let's hold them hostage to keep the money. So I do expect better than this from the EAA.
I wonder if when we...
I respect better, we don't have the same, we don't have the same view of the EAA, obviously.
I think it might
It's
fit.
wrong, no matter which view we have, they shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
I think.
I'm with John in terms of just reporting that, unfortunately, that's the hostage situation is across the board. And maybe, I'm just, again, thinking out loud where to put this discussion, it might be when we further discuss whatever comes out of the so-called McClellan report, which goes to the governor first, then there'll be something from that in bill form, that might be the time that we would more logically say, hey, if we're talking about the NEs, then why is...
And I think you need to, because if this does become a statewide district, does that mean that that is the policy that follows throughout the entire state, in which case CTE is going to be a thing of the past eventually?
Yeah, these are all good points. And does that sound right to try to, at least for now, put that with our list of what we'll do when it gets to that kind of legislation, which we think is a month or two away, but we're watching in case it showed up tomorrow. Not that we think it is. I don't want to say that.
It's not on the agenda.
No, it's not. Thank you. So the rest of our morning discussion, or at least the last item for the morning, and this was very healthy, is the Committee of the Whole agenda is discussion regarding criteria and grant programs. Anything there? Okay, thank you. And we've done closed session. I'd call it to order. This is now at the approval of State Board of Education minutes, item D. Do I have a motion for approval of the regular and Committee of the Whole meeting minutes of January 15th?
So moved.
It's moved by Cassandra, seconded by Richard. Any discussion, corrections? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Thank you, Mertz. We did public participation. We did MD employees. President Austin, John, your report.
Thank you. We might talk about this a little bit. I'm not sure when we talk about legislation, but I think what we're seeing emerge are the bills to change or modify the Michigan Merit Curriculum. I really appreciate having had a chance to visit with someone with Eileen Weiser on how do we work together and hopefully come together to try to be strong advocates for the kind of continued rigor which does translate into better graduation and achievement and better preparation for the next steps, and trying to help each other be persuasive to keep foreign language and a rigorous set of expectations into our schools. I asked Elizabeth Bauer to circulate that nice email example, which I thought was just a nice précis, assuming it's accurate. Eileen, you may know better than I, but she was just encouraging us so strongly to continue to participate in making this case and giving examples. Well, I hear we need more welders. Well, welding requires knowledge of physics, chemistry, math, even computer science today, metallurgy, and so much more, and how you could build all that into the content of what we teach for the benefit of welders and the benefit of people who want to become scientists and engineers and chemists and other professions that are not viewed as more prestigious. So I just would strongly encourage us to work together on that front. I guess I should note, good news on the budget, particularly in the sense of pre-K education, and congratulations to everybody who's been working abroad. I think Education Business Civic Coalition, that shows that can carry the day. As you know, I personally would like to see less flat and more robust support for other pieces of education, particularly teachers in higher ed and other things we need to make as the best investments. But I think that should be viewed as a favorable by all of us. That's early childhood expansion of some nature, so that's something to be noted. I want to talk just really quickly about the forums. A lot of people would like us to have forums. Some are scheduled, some that were sort of initiated by others. Will you come and have a forum with us? Some that are not are sponsored by, not on our books, political organizations would like a forum. But the ideal form of a forum for a state board forum is one where we are present and helping convene, and we share our role, legislature's role, superintendent's role, bring forward issues, legislation, topics of the moment, share our positions on those if we have them, and encourage public discussion of people that are there. So you saw a few that are happening. I think I would ask everybody to, where else do we want to have a forum or help convene a forum? We have a The UP would love us to have a forum, and the Marquette RISA is positioned to organize one that all UP education entities can participate in, even by remote. So I'm asking, is anyone else interested in to go to the UP? And we could schedule around the interest.
Like
And-
June, right?
They test you if they know you're serious if you come up there when
Right.
there's snow.
You have to show your valor by...
We have
Yeah.
other, besides what's already been scheduled, we have people asking, but some are people are asking, volunteering to organize. Certainly, Grand Rapids and West Michigan, lots of requests to have one. So I would, I guess, see when Lupe and with whom would like to take the lead in organizing a forum out there. I don't know how big a net you can capture from West Michigan. Muskegon and South Haven, other people are asking for participation, but you can figure that out. I just got a call yesterday from Detroit. NAACP was asking could they convene a forum for us, and I don't know enough, but that may be a nice entity. Dan or others, Kathy could say whether that would be a good host organization. So they gave even second and fourth Tuesdays in the day, or they have a monthly meeting. So that's another opportunity. And I just offer to the rest of you where else would we like to do one for interest of geography and constituency, I guess. Macomb, Port Huron, other places. And if we have, doing 3 or 4 or 5 more, how many other board members want to take the lead on, I think is appropriate, and then we could figure out how to support each other in pulling them off. It's pretty easy, actually. Yeah.
I'd like to do one in St. Clair, too, in St. Clair County.
Port Huron. Yep.
Right, is there one in the city of Detroit? I don't remember
Not
seeing one of those.
scheduled yet. so.
Okay, so I think that would be important.
Would the NAACP offer be a appropriate host organization to work with?
So why not?
Okay, so
We
maybe
could do
we
Wayne
could
State, too.
commit to build around them. Yeah.
I have an email from you yesterday from the Democratic Party stating that the Democratic Party is chairing the one up in Midland. And what I'd like to propose, because we had a discussion at the last board meeting stating that this was a State Board of Ed activity, what I'd like to suggest perhaps is that the Center for Michigan act as a convener on some of these two, so we have a neutral party. I think that we all want to avoid a conflict of interest on this. It's a State Board of Ed function, I think, instead of a Republican or a Democratic issue. So I'd appreciate that greatly.
No, and I agree, and as I think I noted in my community, some Democratic organizations are convening, and that is separate from our activity. The one in Midland was sponsored by them. That's why it doesn't show up on our board-approved radar. And they are inviting the Mackinac Center on a panel with me, which is healthy, which is good. So I'm certainly eager for us to have the Mackinac Center.
Board forum should
Yeah,
have most of us there.
absolutely.
Is there anyone downriver? I can't remember. Is it Monroe, right?
That was an invite, the STEM thing that
Okay.
yeah, the boards of education down there asked for, and was already held last week. So there could be another more generic forum if we wanted to
I could look
encourage
at
it.
downriver.
Okay.
Was there anybody expressed interest in the downriver?
Well, their education boards and superintendents wanted to do this discussion, particularly around career technical and STEM, because they're trying to nurture
Right.
interest in it. So
Okay.
that
So
was
that
their
already went by,
agenda.
but there was no other offers to come from any groups? in that
I haven't
area?
received any.
Okay, all right, I can,
And what is the timeline we want these scheduled by?
yeah, that's a good question.
April, May?
I think March, April, May. I mean, the notion was, and we'll see, that there were potentially some big ideas, proposals in the air. Actually, I think we should use them to have discussion about Michigan merit and other things usefully, if those are some of the ideas in the air. It's not just the budget, finance, other ideas.
Yeah, because when we did these before, we had 5 or 6, 7 members of the board. They were really board forums. So far, we haven't had any really board forums.
And that's what I'm saying, which are the ones that we want to do where, that we designed to be that way.
Yeah, okay.
That's just responding to folks who want one, which is there to be done.
My only
Okay.
request for Marquette is we do it either at the end or the beginning of the week. For those of us who have to go to work the next day.
So a Grand Rapids, West Michigan one, a Detroit one, and Port Huron, Macomb.
And Macomb, yeah.
Any others that people want to make a priority to do
And the UP.
and the UP, okay. That should keep us busy.
Is there not one in Benzie on February 25th?
Yes, that's one that the League of Women Voters put together. And so that is, I mean, the ones that are already scheduled are, if anyone can make it, I said yes when people asked, could you come do a forum?
We might want to do one in northern Lower Peninsula someplace too, whether it's
Like Traverse City.
Traverse City or maybe Cadillac or something, but...
Maybe on our way back from Marquette.
Yeah.
We'll just have the whole road show.
Right, you should. Okay.
Okay. Good. Thank you. I'm going to tag on that a little bit for a selfish reason that one of you mentioned at lunch that you might be interested in forums. You're also interested in going to schools, and I would say we would happily organize, maybe in tandem if you thought that was appropriate, but Mertz has sent out twice now opportunities kind of in the spirit of what Kathy's talked about for a couple of years now to visit reward schools, which are kind of our new blue ribbon schools, and we haven't had any responses. And the reason we would be happy to help facilitate, as we're happy to help facilitate anything you want on the forums too, but that would be one. And I'm just thinking out loud, maybe that day that board members are clustering at Port Huron, we'd try to organize something that afternoon at School X, for example. Because not only do we want to really say, hey, if you're a beating the odds school, you deserve the attention of a statewide elected official or more, but the other reason is that I think it would accommodate a couple of you who brought this up about wanting to get into schools, because I'm sure they would expand it beyond whatever turned out to be the recognition. It might be a visit, it might be they want to, if you're in the building, they're going to want to highlight programs. That's all good. So I'm just mentioning that also, that this doesn't have to be an either or. This could be something we would do. And then there is a bit of the selfish reason I mentioned is we've kind of promised that to get our waiver that we would have. We didn't specifically say you, but we certainly inferred that high state officials would visit reward schools. So we've got some time on that, but we haven't had a response and just didn't know what that meant and didn't know if there is kind of an interest that we could help, coordinate.
Yeah, we could get that resent.
Yeah, we'll do. Let's resend that. Yep. And then, as I said, we could try to, with some of this discussion, maybe even try to say, well, those of you who are on your way to X anyway at 1 in the afternoon, or if that worked well, you'd stop at such and such a school, and we'd have to make sure they're okay with that date too, but could facilitate a visit. And I think it would be well received by schools that are reward schools. And remember, the reward schools, what I think we should be real proud of is the reward schools now, because of beating the odds, are through the full spectrum of socioeconomics. It tended to be under the old system, the usual suspects were able to show they had high aggregate scores. So they got the blue ribbon, and and it was appropriate for that era, by the way. That was exactly the right thing. But here's now a very nuanced way to say, you have 80%, 90% free lunch, you're still doing this somehow, and we as state board members want a record. Single member at a time would be fine too. I'm sure they would be delighted to have you and would give you a tour, as well as maybe whatever worked out with them to be the way to honor that. It might be an assembly, it might be pictures they want with their student leaders. So we'll resend that out, as Cassandra said, and we'll go from there, okay? Okay, great, thank you. And then I guess I would add, I know we talked about it at lunch a little, but sympathies obviously to Nancy Danhoff and her dad, who passed away recently. And then John, I'd like to build on, I think, highlighting the effort this board, the team here made, Susan most recently, our team through Carol on this is our budget line item, was the early childhood money. and I thought made an excellent pitch with your team, Carol and Susan, with the panels and other things you've been on. And then would certainly give a shout out, to all the other legislative leaders that have seen the light. It's been the last, to my surprise, this last 6 months, a couple of key legislative leaders have seen the light, so that's good, since they vote the appropriate. And then I mentioned earlier, we'll plan in March, assuming that it still sounds right for the Agenda Planning Committee, but kind of a replication of what we did for new board members, to have some of our directors here briefly reconnect with faces. It didn't hit me, but for folks who've been on the board quite a while, we've had a fair amount of turnover, and not all of them get to sit at the table. At the table, it tends to be the same kind of assessment issues and others you see, but especially based on the feedback from Michelle and Lupe at the orientation, we thought it would be good to repeat for the board. And we did it for the Ed Alliance last week. And a little bit that we felt good about as a team is I thought they left realizing we had no idea. Because it's easy, I'm guilty of this, to be kind of critical. Why don't you guys do this? Why don't you do that? And I think when they saw, kind of like what we saw in closed session today, when they saw the daily work that actually goes on to make things happen and to bring supports to schools, whether it's on SIG or the reform office at Deb Leaves or the grant. And I think it helped our relationship. Sandy was there and some others who saw this, but I think it helped mellow, if I could use that word, the feeling that we're kind of waiting to just do something. I mean, it was good, so we're looking forward to repeating that. I don't know why. I normally try to end something with humor here a little, but for this one, I already did that with the Pope candidacy that was a joke. But Longfellow, I just saw that, yeah. Longfellow, I don't know why I like this. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm our hostility. It's really good on a world stage, but it's probably even good in Washington right now. It just struck me for some reason to share with you today. And now we go into usually the most exciting report we have each month. Bobby Joe.
Marilyn, I need this one. I emailed you. It's locked. So you can keep talking.
It's good to have a pause. It's okay.
Everything's gone to sleep. I don't really need it for sure, but I had some pictures. I'm going to highlight my trip to Arizona that I just got back from a couple days ago through the National Teacher of the Year program. So because being a State Teacher of the Year, you're part of this program, we meet 5 times a year with all the other State Teachers of the Year. So it's really exciting, and I just came back from there, so I wanted to highlight a few things from my trip. Show you a couple pictures in just a second. There we go. So the National Teacher of the Year program started out with a nice banquet welcoming us all. It was a great hotel there in Scottsdale, Arizona, so it was a really warm welcome. The first thing that we found out is that we are all going to get a smart board in our classroom. This is about a $10,000 package. It's the smart board, not the pen, but the hand movement. So we had a full day training with that. With somebody from Smart Technologies. So the board I'm going to get on the right. It's very exciting because it's going to be very interactive. They showed us how we can use it with our students and how we can create interactive modules with that as well. So I'm very excited to use that and can't wait till that comes in a few weeks. We learned how to use a smart board by creating our own little lesson about us. which was a really wonderful way to learn about all the other 52 different Teachers of the Year there. So we did that, which was very fun. And of course, they gave all of us teachers about 2 minutes to give the presentation. And everybody, by the time we were done, it was like 5 hours worth. Teachers can't stop talking. So one of the great things, too, that we committed to was sharing lessons. Like I asked earlier with the Next Generation Standards, the sharing the lessons, creating quality lessons, not always reinventing the wheel. So we are committed to sharing the lessons on a smart exchange. And so if we create something in a particular subject, we can add that on there, and everybody else with these smart technologies can use those and utilize them. They divided us into homeroom. So in the Midwest homeroom, they looked at different questions we talked about as a group. Why am I here? What can I do? And got some support from the network. The different homerooms were led by the National Teachers of the Year from the previous 3 years. So that's all of us cold weather folks there. We also talked about what is our message, what can we do with that message, what can we do with this position to help inform others and to help other teachers. Did a lot of different activities. And then over there, part of the network of National State Teachers of the Year is a great network where we can go to different workshops and go to different areas around the country and participate in a lot of exciting things. I was talking to Matinga earlier, and just even having internships in Washington in the summer, different types of opportunities for us. The CCSSO puts on the National Teacher of the Year program. They talked about their other programs, a lot of exciting things that they do, different committees on teacher effectiveness, and that was one of our focuses for the third day that I was there. What makes an educator effective? We all wrote what our different opinions were and posted those around, looked at those, and then we used some technology where we all typed in our top 5 words of what we thought made an educator effective. And then if you've ever seen Wordle before, you can paste all that in there into this Wordle program, and then it takes all of the most used words and puts it according to size. So this is what we had. As you can see, number 1 there, we all felt passion. And I totally agree with that. The passion, creativity, and reflectiveness, the top 3 things that educators need. And that's things that you can't learn, the things that are intrinsic in you. What effective teaching looks like, we did look at the INTAS standards, and not just for pre-service teacher education program, but utilizing it with veteran teachers as well, and what ways can different teachers grow, focusing on their application of skills, multiple approaches to learning, using the assessment data, and more collaboration. So we delve into each of those different standards and looked at those as well. And then there is also the INTAS learning progressions, which I had not heard of before this. And the progressions were a way for a teacher to improve their practice over time, and it rates it from 1 through 3. So if you're at a 1, it shows you what you could do to be at a level 2 to a level 3 in each of the different standards. And it was a way to help teachers improve their practice. Because I believe I can't remember where I heard the quote, but great teachers are not just born but made. And I truly believe that there is more professional development and different ways that we can help teachers become better. I love these 2 quotes that I found in the book. Teaching expertise can be learned, develops over time, and is not linear. And growth can occur through reflection, feedback, and professional learning experiences, especially those first 2. Teachers being one of reflecting upon your practice and teaching other teachers as well how to reflect upon their practice and always or constantly want that improvement and that feedback to get better. From the teachers that I've known, teachers want to wholeheartedly, in their heart, want to become better. The majority of them, I believe, and want to do good and want their children to succeed. And a lot of times they just don't have those ways or know how to. So throughout this day, they were teaching us how to become teacher leaders and how to help people around our district and school to become more effective. We virtually visited different classrooms that they showed us, and we looked at how we could effectively coach each of these teachers to become better, or along that progression line, how we would talk to them and what kind of dialogue we would have with teachers. The other book that we received that I really liked was the Teacher Leader Model Standards, so standards for being a teacher leader. And I love this quote from there: "Within every school there's a sleeping giant of teacher leadership, which can be a strong catalyst for making change." I truly believe that, as being with myself, which I had talked about before, always believing I'm just in my classroom, all I can be is just my teacher, do whatever I can for my students, and moving to a more teacher leadership role in my school and seeing other teachers step up and encouraging that as well. It's very exciting, and I think we need to promote that leadership quality in the teachers that we have, because I think there's a lot of power from within to promote the change that we need. We also heard the National Teachers of the Year speak, which was really wonderful. Rebecca was just remarkable, and not a dry eye when she was done. Very funny. So it was great to meet all of them. And I definitely wouldn't want their schedule. When they went through their schedule, it was crazy. Other events that I have coming up with the other State Teacher of the Year, we're going to go to Washington in April and actually get to meet President Obama and go to a big gala there. Education Commission on the States Forum in June, International Space Camp in July, and then we're going to New York in October. So it's very exciting. We're the class of 2013, so I get to belong to a class again. That's really exciting. And we started a Facebook, so we're going to use each other for collaboration and ideas, so that my network has really grown, and that's really exciting. Now, the whole highlight of my whole trip, besides being in Arizona, where it was warm, and I heard back in Grand Rapids there was 3 storms, so it was really exciting to be there while I was hearing about all that. But the most exciting is what was in these purple bags. And I'm going to try not to get choked up on this, but in the purple bag that they gave us was this booklet, and it's called the Teaching It Forward Scholarship Program. And University of Phoenix gave it to every State Teacher of the Year, and we get to give this to anybody that we want for a full ride scholarship. And it is so exciting, and I already had a young lady in mind who was in my class last year, who was a transfer student. She was a junior last year. Hopefully she's not watching this, because then she'll know. But she was in gangs and kicked out and all kinds of trouble, kicked out of her home, lived with her grandma, lived with different people, just had a lot of issues, and she would talk to me a lot. She came to my class, and she was getting all A's after she transferred. And I was talking to her one day and said, just, you know, you're doing an amazing job. And she said, this is the first A in your class that I've ever gotten. And now I feel like I can do it. I feel like it's not too late for me. I can do it. But then she visits my classroom all the time. She's a senior now, and she said, I'm really worried because I screwed up so much my freshman and sophomore year. My family has no money. My grandma died. She's in foster care now, and I really want to go to college. So just the thought of when I get to talk to her about this, it's going to be the highlight of my whole year. So,
Great. Great.
So that was exciting, and again, I have 52 new friends and educators, and there's where I was, and there's where I came home to.
That's kind of sum it up.
There's a Samoa and no. And what was the one island? Mariana Island.
Thank you. They're exciting. And for new board members, Matinga is a prior Teacher of the Year, and I appreciate your showing up at the teacher forum the other day. You went well by the end. You know, I always start getting a little of this, and by the end it was nice to see your face there. So thank you. And could I just say that I'm on the board of CCSSO, as you know, and one reason I can't get off, by the way, I've been on it 6 years now, is because each year my time comes up to be president, and it would take a lot of time. You'd need to go around to a lot of states. I do turn it, there is one reason when I turn it down that I get a little bit, wish I would do it is because you do get an hour with the president and Arnie Duncan. You know, I was wondering if they could do that up front. I could resign like right after, do it for a month, and then. But you know, one unintended benefit is because you never get up, you never get off. You know, be president, and then they throw you off. So I'm just kind of recycled. And on a serious note, we had a full discussion at our last board meeting, and you'd be happy to know. I mean, I think it's the obvious, but of all the initiatives in the top three, because we have some financial issues too, but in the top three to continue to support with, as you know, with full-time staff and other people as a Teacher of the Year because of the tremendous kind of results you get. And I think I was really happy to hear, because they talked about this in the presentation, the staff did, that a lot of this was, you're a natural at this, but a lot of this was trying to get Teachers of the Year to increase capacity with their message. And that's what I heard you kind of reinforce, and very powerful. And I heard the National Teacher of the Year, you're not second to her. She might have brought tears to your eyes, but you're as good, so very well done. I think this is one where both Marty and Cassandra kind of as so Marty will kick it off. Cassandra is chair of the Legislative Committee.
Thank you, Mike. The legislature is just starting to kick in with its new session. The education committees have been named. We have sent those members to you. And the Senate committee has not met yet. The standing committee has not met yet. The House has met once, maybe twice. And it's more of an education because there are 7 new members of the House Education Committee. So the chair feels that she should bring the new members kind of up to speed on the education issue. So our liaison, Wendy Larvick, went over and did a kind of a Public Education 101 with them and discussed a lot of the key things, a lot of the major issues that they'll be faced with. So that's what they're doing. As was mentioned by both John and Mike, that the governor put out his...
Pope John?
Both John.
Oh, both John.
Both John. Yeah. I'm curious as to what name you'll choose as Pope, Mike.
I've got it already. I'm just saving it. Yep.
I don't know if Martin's been used, but you're more than welcome to use that. There's a St. Martin.
I'm sorry, John.
There is a Pope Martin.
Oh, there is a Pope Martin? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
You're the guy. Well.
So, I got off track. Oh, the budget. The appropriation subcommittees are meeting at this time. They've started the process. Both the House, just like last year, both the House and Senate subcommittees are moving parallel. Way back, not even far back, but the House would run the education budget, pass it, then the Senate would do it. They're doing it concurrently again this year, so the House and Senate are both doing their budgets at the same time. The House Appropriation Subcommittee on Education met this morning. Our team went over to present as far as the department's budget. So again, it's more of an education process right now to talk about what the governor's budget included, and of course then the legislative committees will then dispose of its version. So that process is just beginning. The board's legislative committee meeting went really well. It was full, and so I'll just defer to you, Cassandra, who's the chair.
Oh, thanks. So we met a couple weeks ago now, I think, and a couple of items that we talked about. One is there are now 5 bills, I believe, dealing with the Michigan Merit Curriculum. Changes primarily to foreign language requirements and the math requirements. And so Wendy sent around a summary of those. There's 4 House bills and 1 Senate bill. And Marty was good enough to kind of look and see what we had done as a board previous to this, what kind of statements we made. And essentially, we had kind of interjected our commitment to the Michigan Merit Curriculum through a series of resolutions, one dealing with accreditation and accountability, and then one in April of 2012, which essentially reaffirmed our maintenance of rigor requirement in the Michigan Merit Curriculum. So, and that one was actually a decision by the board to task the legislative committee to draft a detailed resolution stating the same and submit it to the Michigan State Legislature. So I'm kind of throwing it out there now if that's something the board wants to do, or if you'd rather just wait for the legislative committee to come back in March, you know, after we've had a chance to debate it and give you something that you can then feed off of. Kind of throwing that out there for discussion on how you'd like to handle that.
Kathleen?
Well, I think we should draft a more detailed, or just defending the rigor didn't address the exact things that the bills address.
Okay.
So I think we should draft one that addresses what the bills address, because it also includes something about doing something different, or taking away the art courses. That's another area, so that we have supported very strongly. So I think we have to, since we have new members, it's a new board. It's a continuing body, but it's a new board. I think we should do that. And would we have time if we wait till March? Do you think they're going to act on these before March?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, the chairman of the committees can take anything up at any time, but the indication we're getting is that when the new generation of the EAA bill is introduced, whenever that is the priority. So I think that will take first precedent over any other bill. So I'm thinking maybe there will be time.
Okay, so if we have time, I think we should do it. Otherwise, we should just do something today.
Do you want to do a little of both, where a more generic one you would do today in the event something happened tomorrow, and then if not, we also have the legislative committee bring a more detailed one back for March?
Move faster.
Eileen, please.
But I think we have to have something more specific.
I'm sorry, at the legislative committee, we talked about whether or not the department would be able to produce a document tying career tech ed and MEDC job analyses to specific upper-level credit-bearing courses like Algebra 2.
We've been working with our Career Technical Education Office, and we're very close to producing a final document on that.
Okay. Well, that's extremely valuable. So if that exists, then I think you could probably go ahead with that, maybe send it out just so people can see it. But I think that's a huge tool.
John, did you have something?
I agree. And again, as Eileen and others of you know, there's kind of different types of interest for somewhat different reasons that may think it's a good idea to take out bits or pieces of this content. So I guess I would, it helps very much if we're doing this in a strong bipartisan way. I think we should make some sort of simple statement, but a statement that says we want to reaffirm the rigor, here's why, and have some illustrations, but then could reference this broader document that the department put together that is a more thorough articulation. You know, our statement is we believe this is the right thing to do for these reasons and why, and that offers the very helpful bigger case maker, you know, as ammunition behind it that we can all promote. And as you know, we're going to need to encourage friends, allies, and fellow travelers on this who are willing to both testify and give examples, whether it's the Liz Bauer or the Mike Schmidt from Ford Motor, or the you know, the Lou Glazer from a policy point of view of why it makes a lot of sense to build this content into the future preparation and not water it down for different purposes, whether you don't want to lose your kids or you think that not everybody needs it or whatever.
Eileen, please.
We got a memo, an email from Liz Bauer, too, with some ideas of how to sell it. So.
And I understand that two of the bills, Nesbitt and Johnson, I'm sorry, 4072 and 4088, would potentially eliminate the arts credit. So we need to, you know, that's something that I hadn't really noticed before. I was stunned to see it. And there we have it.
Yeah, I mean, in this board, as you...
A good statement.
Yeah. So we could do both, right? We could do something if you want today, and then a more detailed one in March, just in case something happened between now and then.
The last time that we spent time on this, there seemed to be two issues that were surmountable. One was whether or not you could fulfill your language requirements in K-8 as opposed to K-12. And my understanding is that the department actually sent a memo out on that a
Clarified
year
and
ago.
has
Okay,
and
so
continue
that
to.
needs to be pointed out again, because I know that that staff, a number of legislators' staff don't understand that.
Okay.
And then the other one is the fit for the upper-level math classes and the rigidity with which people, with the lack of, actually the fluidity with which we're willing to let people address them through CTE. I think that to pinpoint that, those discussions I found pretty disturbing, because it showed that people didn't understand that you could have Algebra 2 through CTE classes.
Yeah.
And we know it's being done well in the state, and we know that that's a lack of information, but also a lack of vision on how to do it, and a lack of ability to get from point A to point F on implementation. So I don't know how much of this is background information. Maybe there's a packet, then maybe a lot of it is already assembled. And then maybe there's again, affirming the board's commitment to the merit curriculum with the attached paper. But it needs to be packaged for maximum impact and receptivity on their part.
Yeah. Why don't we'll take that on as staff, but for the points you made, I mean, we can include my direct memo to the multiple memos to the field on their ability to do the elementary world language and get credit. The one related to, maybe we should highlight the ISDs and the career centers that are doing the integration in a construction trades course, for instance, to get algebra. And then the third one, as Marty said, we're close, but I do think that last one is as important, which is if we can't answer the question about the 80,000 jobs, everything else kind of becomes second. They just, it's not with malice. This is why I'm saying we better be able to answer that question. I think we can, by the way. And for the board members, that question would be, the inference is, well, we could fill these $80,000 jobs if it wasn't for the MMC. And it really isn't accurate. But we need to be able to show why, because in fairness, if you had a narrative that said that, it sounds a little logical on the surface. Well, if they didn't have to take all that advanced other stuff, they could have been taking career tech, and if they could have taken career tech, they could have had these jobs. Well, you heard the welding example that John cited from Liz, but those three we're working on, and I like the idea. You guys good with the idea of, you know, a package that's beyond, that we provide to staff and even before hearings?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Well, then,
Sound right, Cassandra, with you?
yeah. One last motherly. We worked our way through language last year that was not pejorative. In other words, I'm respectful of the reasons that these bills are being introduced. They are reflective of regional differences in the state, and they're important to the legislators who have brought it forward. So whatever we do, it needs to be just so professional and so respectful, because they hold the power in this. And we may be right, but it doesn't matter unless we can explain it and gain their commitment to keeping it. If we won't win.
And I know you weren't looking for this compliment to say that, but I thought the way you did this in that small session work group was exactly that. And you could see people didn't feel alienated. They felt respected and just tried to understand your view on that. So that was that work group, not in a formal testimony, but I think that makes a big difference.
Do we want a little statement approved today, a little resolution?
I think it sounds like we do, with, as long as we can attach it to a packet of background information.
And then come back also with a more formal one with
Right.
that in March, but for now. So is there a motion along those lines?
Sure. Are you drafting? Okay, great.
But only I can read. But anyway, if we want a little statement, I'm just looking for what's the simple statement that gets those three pieces. I'm sorry.
I think we have to reference what we think. I don't think we have to refer to Mike Schmidt and Lou.
I wasn't about to. I'm sorry.
I thought you were drafting a statement and quoting them or something.
No.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to just find a sentence or two that is a reaffirmation. Try this on for size.
Okay.
To ensure effective preparation of Michigan's young people for careers and entrepreneurial opportunities of today and tomorrow, the State Board of Education reaffirms our commitment to the Michigan Merit Curriculum, including world language or foreign language, whatever the right articulation, rigorous math, and the arts.
We should reference the CTE that that you can teach these things through CTE, because they're getting a lot of pressure from the CTE folks, these legislators, especially the new ones. They're going to work on them. Which brings up another subject, which I'll bring up after we vote on this. We going to vote on this? Or we don't have to vote on it? We've already voted on it.
We could say and opportunities for rigorous CTE instruction. I'm just trying to capture the things that are at risk while basically reaffirming our commitment to the Michigan Merit curriculum.
We can expand on it in the legislative committee.
Right, okay. Yeah, good.
There's no Mike Schmidt in there.
Is that the base?
He's a friend.
Is that the Hall of Famer or is that the Ford guy?
Do it on our own.
Ford guy. So is that a motion by John and supported by Lupe? And any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Okay, thank you.
The only other item, and we don't necessarily need to take any action on this today, but we also talked about the parent trigger bill, which has been reintroduced this year. And last year, we did not put out a statement about the parent trigger bill. Essentially, what we did is just voted at the table to oppose as written, and it was left at that. Throwing it out there if there's interest in doing that again, or if you would rather see the legislative committee come up with something a little stronger, open for discussion.
Comments, preferences?
Again, maybe we should have a statement why we oppose it. Just say we oppose it. Is that saying much?
Yeah. We for those that are new, we tried to do that last time. There was a lot of disagreement on the language, and there was also disagreement on, some people don't necessarily oppose it, some opposed it greatly, and there were varying reasons for each. So we had a really hard time coming up with language that kind of, fit everyone's desires and beliefs on the parent trigger bill. So that's why at the end of the day what we ended up doing was just having a vote of just to let the legislature know that as a board we opposed it as written, as opposed to coming out with something that was much more in-depth.
Well, maybe we can do it this year. This time. I don't know.
It looks to me, did you see any differences?
No.
Yeah.
No difference.
Eileen.
I would just pick our battles on this, and I'm not sure how many more disagreements we're going to have over legislation, but our goal is to change things. So I like the idea of simply saying that we don't agree with it as written, because we're having trouble coming up with concurrence within the group. Whenever we can agree and we're right on something like the merit curriculum, I think we want to spend our money, our education money there.
Whatever little capital we have. Right. Is it moving at all, or
There's no, like I said, the Senate Standing Committee has not scheduled a meeting yet, so.
Well, I
it's a
would
Senate bill.
encourage us, for all those reasons, to just restate what we stated before.
And if I can add one more thing, I think they tried one school in California. I mean, isn't this like not used in the states where, I'm looking over at Wendy, but do you remember any statistics on this?
Well, they've had court cases, and there was a decision that allowed something to move forward, but I'm not certain what the next step will be.
Yeah, it's a cumbersome mechanism.
It was a mess in California.
So there. That's the official statement. I like cumbersome mechanism better.
No, that is a... No, at our CCSSO meetings, we talked, and and by the way, we got in a little thicket at the end there, because when it looked like it was the last bill that might go through and looked like for sure it was going to go through, we weren't advocating for that bill. We were just saying we need a bill to put the accreditation thing on and attach, and then it all kind of fell apart anyway. But clarity on that, unless it's as John suggested, what we already have as marching orders, would be up to you, Cassandra, and the team. Eileen?
I turn to Marty and Wendy. Are we better off waiting until it actually becomes an issue? I mean, we don't have to forward an opinion on it until it's perking along, right?
That's what the board has normally done, is they've waited for it to come up, and then the legislative committee would review and then make a position on it, on most bills. But, it's like, the bill hasn't changed from when it was last year, so it's really up to the board.
And we have marching orders on the way it's written now to oppose.
Right.
If it were to change in substance or even in, in other ways, I think then we'd have to get to the legislative committee. Michelle, please.
I'm just, maybe I'm new and I'm missing something, but, it seems like legislation can turn on a dime.
Yeah.
Have something in your back pocket, just in case. It's always good. I'm just wondering if it makes sense that if we just drafted, took a stab at maybe drafting something, given there was a debate on it in the past, but the board has changed as well. So at least to consider before we just say, let's just say the last time, maybe we could actually have a discussion and look at two alternatives like that.
That's perfectly.
So, Michelle, we have one that simply says we don't agree with it as written. And what we're saying is that because the bill's not in committee right now, it's not up at bat, that we would wait with that. We have that, until it actually comes to committee and becomes an issue, because it may never come. We have it, we're ready.
That turns so quickly.
Yeah,
it's not
but
in session right now, but I've seen some legislation just.
we have it, and Wendy and Marty are pretty good about that, but the legislative committee has something, and are we comfortable with?
We have
didn't.
nothing.
Oh, I thought we.
No. We never decided on any language whatsoever.
Okay.
So it was just a vote of the board to just openly say we're not in support of this. That's all we have.
So we have
As
the
written.
board vote, which means that we do have, the legislative committee defers to the board on that.
Is there some downside that you see to even drafting something to consider besides that?
This is a 6-2 Dem board, and it's a Republican everything else, so I'm just trying to say, I don't want to waste my time on that when we have the Ennis bill that we have to discuss at some point. There's other there's priorities that the board will have time, will need time to work through, I think, because there's going to be subtleties to this stuff that we're going to have to figure out, or there may not be, but it's going to take time. The legislative committee meetings aren't that long right now, but they have been in the past. Some of them have been epic. The stuff of legends. So I'm just looking for making sure our energy is pointed in the best spot for expending it.
We have a new taskmaster in charge over here. They haven't been as long. They've been kind of. Well, we have.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, we have, for the way it's written now, and frankly, I think we would use some license in that if it marginally changed to oppose it based on that vote. That doesn't mean that the legislative committee can, at its next meeting, as you desire, choose to take that up or not. And if, in fact, anything did come, I think Eileen's probably right. I don't think it's going to come before March, but, we've seen other surprises. This is why I'm always saying we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow for sure. So it wouldn't be out of the question that then the committee takes that up in March. But for now, we are clear that we're in opposition as it's written. That's the one that's back on the table.
Policy, as long as there's any question with the new board that is a board policy. That
Oh,
was board
I
policy
see.
from last board. So we could just simply reaffirm today that statement and then have a fuller discussion or recommendation for legislative committee emerge, right? But I do agree with Eileen. I think simply opposing it is probably where we end up, and we have larger fish to fry thoughtfully. Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
We're good? Great. Good work.
I
Thank
wanted to raise a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Someplace, was it in your report, Marty, I read about inviting the committees, the legislative committees, the education committees, and the appropriation subcommittees?
Yeah, that was actually, that's a recommendation that the legislative committee made to the agenda setting committee.
Oh.
And the
okay.
recommendation is that we would request a joint session with the K-12 appropriation subcommittees during the March meeting, and then in April request the emergency financial managers Roy Roberts and Don Weatherspoon to visit.
Okay.
The legislative committee is recommending that to agenda planning committee, which basically means the department is working on it.
Okay, so so you're giving them the agenda to come here before?
Yes. Yep.
Well, but I think you're asking procedural. Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything that's gone agenda planning that hasn't gotten concurrence. I would say we already know from Rogers that March isn't going to be a good month, so we may have to flip-flop that, and it might be April. And I thought, are the emergency managers also April? Okay. I mean, they probably would be flexible. I think, you know, I think I mentioned to you, we sent the letter, the joint letter from John and from, we both signed, and Roy called me. I told him, as I would, of course, that I think it would be a good thing. He's already agreed to do it. I don't know that he wouldn't be more flexible if we didn't think it should be both the same day on April. But, you know, agenda planning could kind of sort through that if you'd like. And as I said, since he seemed open, I'm not sure March couldn't happen. Maybe we just flip-flop the two. Let us work through that, okay? I think he's already got April on his agenda the more I think about it. We don't want to, yeah, we don't want to tempt fate that, how do I want to say this? I mean, now that we know we can get him in April, I think we should leave him in April. And it's not even a full commitment that they can get the committee together by April. That may bleed.
Right.
So I think I'm answering my own question. We'll keep, since we got a yes from Roy, we haven't heard, I don't think, from Weatherspoon.
Correct.
We would keep Roy on in April, and we would work towards the April meeting for the legislature. I'm sure we can work around that. Then we can get a twofer.
So that's in the works too, then.
Yeah, they're both in the works. Although, as I said, Roy Roberts has committed to April, so that's good. I think it is healthy, and told him so. You know, I think, in fairness, there's a little. Well, I don't want to comment. I mean, he's going to come, so that's good.
Okay.
So we're good on that? Thank you, Marty. The next item is the approval of Special Education Advisory Committee nominations and replacement of one organizational seat. And as you know, each year the board is asked to approve nominations of the SEAC committee, and we're seeking approval of 9 organizational nominations, 3 at-large members, 3 alternates, and 1 organizational seat replacement. 2 additional nominees were submitted yesterday, and we don't have their bios, so we'll return next month for your consideration of those 2, unless we want to move on those today. We can.
Michelle is recommending 2, if you want to speak on those 2 that you're recommending.
One of them I know very well. Oh, try my mic on. Sorry, got it, sorry.
You're going to have to repeat everything you said today.
One of them I know very well. Her name is Barbara Brish. She is a special ed director in Lincoln Park, and she does consolidated services for the Downriver area. She's somebody I think should bring a lot. She's been there. She's been in that district for, I don't know, maybe 20 years. But what she brings is, I found that even though she has limited resources, she's incredibly innovative. She has done, you know, working on all different types of projects, getting grants. She's very good at that. She's very responsive to parents and very loyal staff. I think having somebody on the ground level dealing with all of this, someone who I think has high integrity, very intelligent, and really is dealing with on the ground with the policies that are made around special ed, I think she would be a great person to add to the advisory committee. She also does work with Wayne State University, puts on different forums and things like that. She's anyway, she's highly respected by those who know her in that area. The other person was somebody that was recommended to me, and I've just gotten to know. She's also a foster parent, but she's fostered 75 children or something. But she's the executive director for the Down Syndrome Guild of Southeast Michigan, which is a parent-led nonprofit organization that looks out for the interests of people with Down syndrome and families that are taking care of them. She's somebody who came highly recommended by people I know at the ARC of Michigan ARC, and they thought she would bring a parental perspective and as an advocate of a nonprofit dealing with these issues would also be somebody who would be like a good person. Both of them would be honored to serve.
Okay.
Would you like to make a motion for?
Do we need 2 or 3? I have someone too I was going to...
Eleanor, do you?
You need 3 at-large members.
3?
Those are the vacancies currently, 3 at-large members. Hi, how are you?
I have a woman who was a retired special ed teacher. She retired from the Moses Field School in Detroit, which is for multiply handicapped children and young adults. And she's also a lawyer, actually. But she was an excellent teacher, and she really is passionate about teaching these very difficult people to teach.
Yeah.
When she retired, I got calls from the parents from that school. I have been to that school a number of times, and I had met her. And they invited me to, we were having the parents arranged a retirement celebration for her. The school wasn't doing anything, but the parents, and they were so pleased with what their kids had been able to do, which seemed impossible probably to them. It was very heartwarming. So she's now retired, and she would be available. Susan Averbach.
Susan Averbach. And Lupe, and then Sally. Lupe had a comment.
Well, I am, first of all, what is the deadline to submit names to recommend to this committee?
When would be the deadline?
September. Passed.
So we're already flexible.
Right, and I just want to make sure that, because usually what we do is some of the late work for you in the Office of Special Education. So we have names, when you submit names to us, we call those individuals and ensure that they know it's a 3-year commitment. And then we look at our list to ensure that there's race, gender, and geographic representation. 51% of the SEAC membership have to either be individuals with a disability or parents with a disability, parents of a child with a disability. So far our group is going to be fine the way we're looking at it. I don't know if you want us to prepare bios on those candidates that we've not talked to, or if the board wants to take action.
What was your? Please, yes.
In looking at the roster of the people that are already committed and are being recommended, I want to see, or I want to know if there's ethnic diversity here and geographic, because I would like to have people from the west side of the state start participating on the state board of education matters and in the department. So that's very important to me as a board member. So.
Yes, Sally, on that point?
That's what Eleanor's asking. If you want her to prep some bios and talk to these people, then she can kind of let you know what the geographic, do we have racial ethnic diversity, do we have gender, everything she was just mentioning. So, but to do that, we would need to know those names and do some follow-up and then come back next month with the names for you to decide.
But if you scroll down, each person that's listed here has a bio, so it gives you their address and...
Yes, I did do that.
Okay.
I don't see
it gives you their race, their gender.
I don't see anybody from the west side.
Gerald Joe is from Grand Rapids.
Who's that?
Gerald Joe.
Now,
Maybe I haven't looked far enough.
to Cassandra's point, when I don't have that in front of me, when you're scrolling down, is it of the 3 new ones also? Are there bios? The 3 that were talked about today, I mean, by Michelle and Kathy.
No.
So I think what Sally, I'm quite sure what Sally and Eleanor are saying is we would want to take the 3 that are mentioned, and in the meantime, if this sounds right, Lupe, to nominate someone else soon, that then those are 4 names we could look at and see if it makes the mix, the 51% requirement, and then other things including geography and ethnicity. Does that sound okay, to take the name that Kathy mentioned, your 2, and 1, if you might suggest one, Lupe, then, because I think in addition to what Cassandra is saying, those are the current members. We would need to see these 4 and how they fit. Right. And do you have a name in mind, or do you want to research one that you might?
I don't have a name in mind because I didn't pay too much attention to this particular issue that we were going to discuss.
That's fine.
I didn't look for a particular person, but I can. Because I like, if one is not enough from the west side of the state, so I want to look for other people that I can recommend and get information from other groups that can help me nominate someone.
Yeah, we can do that because we really have till the next meeting, because I think with what we just said, the three names that,
I'm willing to hold this up again.
I'm sorry, also we have the organizational membership that has to be approved because we had one organization that ceased to exist. So therefore, we had to look at other organizations to determine who would best represent the students in Michigan as well as students with disabilities, and that recommendation is before you as well.
can you mention that specifically?
Michigan Elementary and Middle School Principals Association.
The only ones that the board appoints, nominates 3 people.
Yes.
So-
There are 8 at-large members that the board,
At-large members.
right,
So-
that the board nominates and
So
selects.
I'll give you mine to appoint one.
Well, you could go ahead and recommend, but I would like to recommend some people from the west side and more university.
Yeah,
Will
please.
there be more openings in September?
Actually, what happens sometimes is individuals have to leave for various reasons mid-year, and so that's why the openings came up.
So could I suggest this, that we allow a little more time in the next couple of weeks for Lupe and anyone else who'd like to make nominations. We'll at this time also get bios, if you can help us with those on the 3 mentioned, the 1 Kathy mentioned and the 2 that you have, Michelle. And then those 4 would be looked at in terms of what you have to do as a requirement anyway, the 51%, the ethnicity, and the points that Lupe made. And then we would bring back a recommendation for you to act on. But I think I hear you asking, we do need one today based on adding that one organization, or unless you have a different suggestion for that. We need.
Can I suggest that we go ahead and approve all of the individuals who'd be representing an association? And then the only ones left at that point will be the at-large positions where we have actual
Okay. Is
input.
is that a good motion? So moved by Cassandra,
Is that a motion? I support it.
second by Richard. Any further discussion on that piece?
Does that include the organizational seat replacement also, your recommendation?
Yes.
That includes the organizational seat replacement.
Are you comfortable? 'Cause so we're approving the roster with the exception of the at-large ones that you're going to bring back how any recommendations fit against the larger complex of diversities and a recommendation too on, we think, given all this, these 2 or 3 or whatever is left are the right.
Did you just say that you would withhold yours and?
I'll hold mine, and if you
we
and
have-
Lupe can come up with 2 names.
3.
3, and
3.
so,
So,
okay.
oh, I see. So, Kath, we're not examining your bio, not your bio, but your candidate bio. You're withdrawing that and
So that
deferring
they
to
could
these.
have-
But I think that's a good point, and I believe there are people on the west side that would have candidates in mind and would help.
We got 2.
You might know
St.
somebody
Joe
too.
and Grand Rapids.
Oh, okay.
Grand Rapids, 2 out of,
I know
I know when you
Yeah, they got some in the
Claire Falls,
UP
I
and-
think there's more around the
west.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, there's 2 from the west side, St. Joe and Grand Rapids. And then Claire's a 3rd, yeah.
And we have a dearth of minorities.
I don't think I do have a second.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I do. Richard's a second. So we have a motion, and it was supported. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same? Great, thank you. Thanks, Eleanor. Sally, and we'll look forward to taking the at-large ones at the next meeting. Okay, this is approval of State Board of Ed and Michigan Department of Ed co-sponsorships for conferences. They all happen to be, if Susan and Lindy want to join me, they all happen to be within that arena. And it's recommended that the State Board support the co-sponsorship of these conferences and events. And are there any?
And move approval of the State Board co-sponsorships.
It's moved by Kathleen, supported by John. Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same? Thank you. Good job.
We're going to give lessons.
Yeah. Consent agenda. Do I have a motion, please?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Moved by John, supported by Eileen. And there isn't discussion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same. Thank you. Comments by State Board of Ed members.
Yeah, I wanted to mention another article that was in yesterday's Detroit Free Press that sort of follows up on Bobby Joe's report. It was a lovely article about teachers in the Van Buren district who went to bat for a deaf student who was a migrant worker's child when she was brought to this country at age 10, totally deaf, and had never learned English, of course. And she had a terrible time until she began to learn. She had to learn English before she could learn sign language, because sign language is in English. But they taught her, and apparently she's a very bright kid, and she was accepted at Gallaudet University. But she had to get her English up to speed. It was she could understand, but it wasn't good enough for her to learn everything at college level. So she needed money. It was an extra cost to do that. So the teachers developed a plan. They went on Facebook and they described this story, and they raised $10,000 or $12,000, $10,000, and she had a grant that somehow disappeared for $2,000. So they raised another $2,000 so she could go to Gallaudet before the semester started to learn better English, learn English better. I have to learn it myself. So I thought it was such a wonderful story. These teachers in Van Buren ISD went to bat for this girl because they were so excited. She was the first child in her family who was going to college. And it was such a heartwarming story. And I just keep finding all these stories about these wonderful teachers. And it just pains me that teachers are not being recognized as much as they should be. And I wanted to bring it to the attention if you hadn't seen it in the paper yesterday.
That's
so
great.
I thought it was a wonderful story.
Yeah. Great shout out.
Yeah.
We need those regularly. Thank you. Other board comments? John.
I forgot to mention, I got a nice letter back from the State of Connecticut State Board of Education chairperson thanking us for our expression of condolences, which I think Mary Ann in particular was encouraging us to do, and the staff here, you guys did a really nice job of getting that message through to Connecticut, so thank you.
Oh, that's nice.
That's great. Okay, our next meeting is March 12th, and wish you a good remainder of the month, and the meeting's adjourned.
Well, I'll talk to the agenda planning committee.
Anyone that has not
Maybe I'll send him
Nancy's safety card, please.
I didn't do that yet. I gave money at lunch. I'm always happy to be part of